The field breathes beneath the evening sky, a hush settling over gravel paths and empty bleachers. Faint echoes curl around the chain-link fence, the kind that carries laughter or dreams, or the solemn rhythm of cleats against earth. Somewhere, in the distance, a goalpost leans just slightly, a worn metal relic left behind by 1,000 games and the weightless hope of countless children. The sun bows low, casting the field in gentle strokes of amber, and there, under the lowering hush of dusk, a voice begins, but not from this stadium, not from the roars of glory or the crackling fervor of fans. No, the voice begins far away, in the quiet town of Redding, nestled in the northern reaches of California, where pine trees rise like cathedrals and the days stretch long in the summer. It was here, in the edges of quiet and brush, that Megan Anna Rapinoe first laced her childhood with dreams. Born in 1985, the fifth of 6 spirited children, Megan entered the world not with a shout, but with observation. Eyes wide, hair light, gait quick. She filled her lungs not only with breath, but with questions, with laughter, with rhythm, the kind of rhythm that led her feet to chase a ball through backyard, grass and summer dust. And she was not alone. Beside her, in footsteps that nearly mirrored her own, was her twin sister, Rachel. In those early years, wherever one went, the other followed, not by demand, but by an unspoken tether only twins can know. The ball bound them, a kind of compass pointing always to the next game, the next field, the next reason to run. The Rapinoe household knew chaos, noise, and the kind of candy-colored commotion that only 6 children can create. But beneath the surface, there was also symmetry. Megan was the spark. Rachel was the tether. Megan restless and quick-witted. Rachel steady and intuitive. Together, they were not just sisters. They were a team. A goal net strung up between fence. Posts became the portal to another world. Hours slipped away chasing shadows in the northern heat, the ball never still. And while other girls in the neighborhood might have turned their heads toward dolls or daydreams, Megan's attention never wandered far from the game in Redding. There weren't many lights illuminating the possibility of greatness. No university, banners, no Olympic programs, no roaring stadiums, only gravel roads and long horizons. But sometimes the quietest corners plant the most defiant seeds. She was small but swift, light on her feet, and there was something unusual about the way she moved, with the ball agency tempered by restraint, a hesitation that wasn't fear, just calculation. She could read things, anticipate them. Her game, even then, had texture. The people in Redding whispered about her and her sister. In game after game, the twins baffled defenses with their uncanny unity. They passed not with their eyes, but with instinct, as if the ball were part of who they were. It was Rachel who helped wrap Megan's wildness in purpose, and it was Megan who dared to believe they could do more than just play. And always there was the landscaper. Same pine-covered ridges watched over their scrimmages. The same golden hush before dusk ushered them home with dirt on their shins and grass in their hair. The fields in Redding were not grand, but Megan didn't need grandeur. She only needed width to run, distance to chase, and a sky wide enough to hold her ambition. She was mischievous and bright-eyed, defiant at times, with a grin that foretold the wit that would later define her. Her humor didn't clamor for attention, slipped in quietly, unpredictably, like a chipped pass with genius at its edge. In school, she kept a low profile, never quite blending in. A little quirky, a little tender under armor, she resisted easy definition. Growing up gay in a small town wasn't always simple, but as a child, it hadn't yet needed words, only space, only imagination, and soccer gave that. It was an escape, but also a homecoming. Backyard tournaments became weekend leagues. Coaches took notice. Whispers turned to promises. There was something about Megan and the way she touched the ball, the way her left foot sculpted passes that felt like they'd been written in advance. Even as her teammates chased the game, Megan often seemed a step ahead, already shaping what came next. And through all of it, trainee drives to tournaments, bruised shins, lost games, and won once her quiet town watched. Where does greatness begin? Not in trophy cases, not in spotlights. Greatness is born in the whisper of intention, in the dust beneath scuffed cleats, in two girls passing until dark, unaware that anyone is watching. She would become a name emblazoned across jerseys, a voice that stirred stadiums and unsettled institutions. But first, she was a shadow on a twilight field, a daughter of Reading, one of 6, with mismatched boots and a heart that beat for motion. This is the story of the fire behind the color, the calm behind the storm. Megan Rapinoe in 8 breaths. The ball didn't always bounce kindly. Even in childhood, Megan learned early that control was an illusion, and yet she chased it anyway. Long before she became a name in lights, she was a name scribbled onto local rosters with uneven ink. And even then, there was a quiet expectation that followed. She and Rachel moved like halves of the same idea, while other kids tried to orchestrate their thoughts into movement. The Rapinoe twins danced through defenders like they'd already dreamt the steps. They didn't call plays. They didn't shout commands. They simply moved together as one. Their first games took place on dusty local fields, the kind with worn-out sidelines and crooked cones. Uniforms were oversized. Sponsors were local diners or family-owned tire shops, and weekend matches drew small clusters of lawn chairs and hand-clapping parents. There were no agents, no scholarships, no shortcuts, only the game in its simplest form. And Megan, she thrived in that simplicity, not because the game was easy, but because it revealed who she was, even as a child. She carried a sense of mischief in her play. A defender would close, and Megan wouldn't just pass. She would slip the ball behind her heel with a flick and grin before sprinting forward. Not showboating, just delight. Just play, but beneath the joy, something more serious stirred. She wanted to win. Not to hold trophies in her hands, but to test what was possible. A question that pulsed underneath. How far can I take this? There were moments when the field became a mirror. It showed her who she was. Some days that reflection was complicated. As her skill grew, so did the pressure. Coaches noticed her. They noticed both of them. Whispers followed wherever they went. The twins are playing. But the world of youth soccer was not built around young girls who dared to defy categories. Megan didn't always feel at ease in those early environments, not just because she was a girl among boys at times, but because she knew, deep down, that she brought something different. She didn't always fit in, and she didn't want to. She dressed in her own way, wore her hair carelessly, laughed too loudly, threw sarcasm like a pass across the midfield. Teachers admired her wit, but often marked her as distracted. Fellow students were drawn to her, and occasionally confused by her. She didn't try to blend, she didn't know how, and when things hurt, she didn't always say so. There was, in those years, a quiet armor layering round her, a practiced aloofness, the kind that kids build when they sense the world might not know what to do with them. But on the pitch she didn't need to pretend that the ball didn't care. It only asked, "Can you move me forward?" Megan always could. She and Rachel joined competitive leagues, traveling hours each weekend just to put on cleats and face off against clubs from other towns. Each trip was part promise, part pilgrimage. They weren't from a famous zip code. They didn't have private trainers or year-round facilities. Just talent, just spine. The game sharpened them. Not all ended in victory. Some finished with scrapes on the knees, slumped shoulders, silent car rides home. But Megan never stopped coming back for more. Not because someone told her she had to, because something inside her demanded it. Her parents' a blend of support and resilience drove them to game after game, tournament after tournament. They didn't push fame or scholarships. They didn't even fully understand this world of competitive soccer, but they knew how to show up. And they did every weekend in those passenger seats between fields. Her dreams started to collect shape, but she didn't share them much out loud. Not yet, because what happens when a dream feels bigger than the place you're dreaming it from? Injuries came early, like unwelcome shadows. Twisted ankles, pulled muscles, and once a bone-deep strain. That kept her out for Wicks's sentence, it seemed. In a life measured by minutes on the pitch, but even on the sidelines, her mind stayed in motion, observant, sharp. She noticed spacing, anticipated plays, studied angles. It frustrated her to be still. Yet somehow, the game kept reaching for her even when she stood still to watch it pass. When she healed, she came back stronger, not by lifting weights or shouting affirmations, but by listening to her own rhythms, by trusting what her feet knew before her mind could name it. Home. Her room wasn't filled with posters of pop stars or movie actors but athletes. Brandi Chastain, Mia Hamm, Cindy Potlow, the US women's national team had won it all in 1999. And Megan had watched, transfixed, as heroes celebrated in ways she'd never seen women allowed to before. It wasn't just the goals, it was the revelry, the rawness, the joy made public. Something clicked that summer, not in words, but in conviction. Maybe one day, someone would wear her face on their wall. But still first came the battles right in front of her. There were scouts, there were tryouts, there were murmurs of college programs and rising stars. As high school approached, Megan began to wrestle with what lay ahead and with who she was becoming. She loved the game. That much was clear, but in quiet moments, that other quiet truth whispered louder, that she was different, not just in style or humor, but in who she was, deep down. The realization moved slowly, not a sudden epiphany, but a low hum. She didn't yet have the words for it, and wasn't always sure she wanted them. What she knew for certain was this: the game loved her, just as she was. There, her expression was whole. There, the things that made her complicated in hallways and classrooms made her luminous between the lines. Every time she stepped onto the field, she stepped more into herself, and Rachel was always near, quietly watching, rooting, lending balance. It was this bond that steadied her, and the game that stretched her vision outward. She was still quirky, still unfiltered, still hard to define, but she was growing into a game that was itself. Changing what began on backyard grass had led her to flights across state lines, 2 coaches scribbling her name with underlines, to a future no longer abstract, but glimmering. And though she wouldn't know exactly how far her path would go, Megan Rapinoe was even then becoming. She didn't chase glory, she chased the feeling of the ball on her toe, of silence before. The swing of becoming who she was meant to be, all while running toward a horizon only she could see. The University of Portland wasn't the loudest choice. It wasn't the expected one. Other programs had the glare, the trophies, the guarantees. But Megan didn't want guarantees. She wanted room. Room to move, to think, to be. Portland surrounded by green, draped in rain. Heavier in thought than in fanfareford. That as she stepped onto campus in 2005, there was a quiet readiness. Not in volume, but in intent. She came not to announce herself, but to learn something only the game could teach, and soon, very soon, the game answered back. Her freshman year unfurled with rare electricity. The moment she touched the field, it was evident this was no ordinary newcomer. Her left foot wasn't just precise, it was poetic. She threaded passes that didn't just find feet, they found meaning. She danced down wings with a control that whispered rather than shouted. Balance wrapped in boldness. Risk tucked neatly under restraint. Each match felt like peeling back a new layer of what she could be. The Portland Pilots didn't just win, they glided. And Megan, always disarming with grin and grace, became their secret storm. Her goals weren't always showy, but always intelligent. Her assists could come with the simplest flick, or with a bending cross that left defenders frozen and behind. Her lightly sarcastic interviews, behind her jokes and ease with reporters, was the mind of someone scripting while she played. But greatness doesn't come without cost. Midway into that first brilliant season, pain, sharp and sudden. A tear, the acronym no player wants, repeated ACL. The rupture quieted everything. The lights, the rhythm, the streak. In 1 second, the swing of her path had paused. Athletes are used to movement, to momentum, to having answers found on the next play. But there, confined to the edges and wrapped in physical therapy routines, Megan had to learn something else. How to be still, how to build again from beneath. She didn't want to be brave. She didn't want a silver lining. She wanted to run again. She wanted her feet back, her motion, her independence. But healing isn't made of desire. It's made of patience, of repetition, of trust in invisible processes. And she wasn't alone. Not long after, her twin, her tether Rachel, tore her own ACL. In the same knee, it was a symmetry neither of them had asked for. And yet, in the quiet months that followed, it tethered them tighter. Therapy sessions became parallel paths. Frustrations shared over ice packs and cautious hope. They laughed through pain, cried in solitude. One would feel strong, the other falter on switch. Again, on the next day, no cameras rolled. No trophies waited. Only long roads and longer silences. The world looked away, but Megan stared inward, and when she returned to play, she didn't sprint out. She listened again, cautious at first, then clearer. Every movement was a question, met with an answer. Can I still do this? Yes, not just yes in function, but yes in fire. And then, as she climbed again, the same leg gave out another tear. Another ACL, another year away. Some players don't return once, almost none return twice. The spotlight dulled. Future projections grew quiet. Teammates graduated, buzz faded, but Megan remained. Not because she needed to prove anyone wrong, though maybe, in her heart, she did, but because the game had not yet said goodbye. She wore the brace with annoyance, refused to dress it in drama. She joked, still grinned, but those who knew her saw the steel underneath. The kind forged silently. No anger, no self-pity, only forward. And when she came back again, it was not with explosions or hat tricks, it was with nuance. She read the field not just as an athlete, but as someone who had almost lost it. She saw windows before they opened, disguised her plays beneath ordinary movement, toyed with tempo, dictated it in subtle strokes. Her teammates trusted her with more than passes. They trusted her with belief, and while others saw recovery, those inside the game saw reinvention. She wasn't as fast, but the game around her slowed just enough to let her brilliance stretch. And in that stretch, selectors watched. The national team hovered quietly. Her name circled again, but national camps were crowded, spots finite, timing delicate. Still, one by one, the calls arrived. She joined the US U20 team, then appeared for the senior squad in 2006. Just a handful of caps, no guarantees, but she saw the door and slipped a foot inside, still finishing college, still unsure what fully lay ahead. But the gears were turning, and more importantly, the voice inside her stirred again. The one that didn't speak in sentences, but in patterns, in flicks and fix. It had gone quiet in those years of injury. Now, it returned, calmer, wiser, unshaken, because once you've met the stillness, really sat with it, you are less afraid of whatever follows. Some careers are meteors, was geological, pressure, time, layers. She rebuilt from raw, and from that base, she would rise, but not to become an image. She was not chasing icons. She was chasing the moment when mind, foot, and instinct converge. Not for the crowd's applause, for her own. She was not made to play a part. She was made to play the game fully, fiercely, again and again, even after it tried to take itself from her. Especially then, because when she returned to the silence of warm-up fields, to the rhythm of touches on grass, to the stretch before the storm, she remembered that the game was not given. It was earned, and she had come to play. The invitation didn't arrive with fanfare. It came as a subtle nod. Another step, another door cracked open. Megan Rapinoe, still rebuilding, still reshaping her game, found her name whispered in the same breath as legends. The US women's national team, a dream from childhood, dream too big for most to utter aloud, was now real. Stitched to the crest just above her heart, her first cap came in 2006. Just one game, a slender appearance, like dipping a toe in ocean water. She was there, but not yet anchored. The team was crowded with names, bold and bright. Abby Wambach, Christine Lilly, Heather O'Reilly, titans of the game, and Rapinoe. She hovered on the edges, learning, watching, carrying both reverence and quiet ambition in her boots. She wasn't a star, not yet. She was a presence, a flicker on the wing. A player with peculiar angles and unexpected finesse, whose left foot didn't just strike, it sculpted. Her early national years ebbed and flowed. She wasn't always selected. Injuries interrupted momentum. Consistency eluded her. But every camp, every minute, every time the anthem played while she stood among the elite, it meant something. She fought for it. By 2011, she was ready. The call to the World Cup didn't shock insiders, but it startled those outside the circle. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't first on the promotional posters. But when the tournament began, It didn't take long for Megan Rapinoe to carve her place. Her role, a spark from the bench. Not a starter, not the face of the squad, but a weapon. A change in tempo. A new texture when predictability dulled the rhythm. And in Germany, that rhythm would need disruption. The US team didn't glide through the tournament. They stumbled, they clawed. They found themselves on the edge of elimination quarterfinals against Brazil. A match weighted by history, flair, and fatigue. And as the minutes crept past 90, then 120, the narrative looked certain and bleak, until the ball found Megan on the left flank. Space, but pressure. Time, but disappearing fast. She didn't hesitate. With her left foot, she launched it charged. It threaded it across a breadth of sky to the head of Abby Wambach. A second-story miracle. A goal that came too late for logic, but just in time for destiny. Bont 2-2 ND minute. A cry against collapse. That cross, still spiraling in memory, became etched on hearts and highlight reels all over the world. It wasn't just a pass, it was punctuation. A message forged in defiance and grace. And it wasn't luck, it was Rapinoe afterward. She stood beside cameras, laughing, cheeky, irreverent. When asked about the play, she simply grinned. I just encrossed it. Poetry wrapped in profanity. A moment that defined Herbold and brilliant, effortless yet engineered. That was Megan. Brazil was beaten in the penalty shootout. The US were through. And suddenly, Rapinoe wasn't just on the team, she was essential. The World Cup rolled toward its final stop. The US battled to the last match, facing Japan. Again, the spotlight burned. Again, every touch mattered. Rapinoe played with range and invention, her trust in her instincts unshaken. But Japan played with something else, purpose laced with sorrow. A team still mending from the tsunami that had earlier wrecked their nation. And as the final whistle blew after extra time, it was their victory. Heartbreak for the US silver, not gold. But even in that loss, there was scorched beauty, danced into new awareness. Her style, lived now on a global stage, was too singular to ignore. She didn't play the game like others. She bent it, morphed it, stitched it around her left foot. Coaches took notice. Commentators searched for new language to describe her, because she didn't fit easily into Puritan scripts. She wasn't relentless in the way athletes are often portrayed. She was thoughtful, cerebral, but never detached. She celebrated goals with wild gestures and sly smirks. She taunted defenders, but always with an artist's brush, not a cannon's fire. Suddenly, Megan Rapinoe was not just part of the team, she was part of the story. Her presence electrified moments in matches after the cup. Fans saw her differently. Little girls wore her numbered posters, bore her smile, and still, she played with mischief tucked in her mechanics. It was never about raw power. It was the mind, the timing, the restraint before the cut, the subtle drop of the shoulder, the lift of the chin. Decisions made milliseconds before anyone else saw the opening. Her teammates loved her because she brought levity, but also because she brought solutions. When the field tightened, when the pressure mounted, Megan could find the pocket. The game began to lean on her, and she didn't flinch. She might still shrug off the praise, tilt her head sideways in mock embarrassment, but even then, she knew what she had become. Someone who could lift a match by its collar and tilt it toward wonder, not with volume, but with craft that made the crowd hush before it erupted. Her journey to this point hadn't been linear. She hadn't coasted, she'd broken. Twice she'd been sidelined, passed over, doubted by others, by herself. But this chapter whispered something new. She belonged, not because of one cross in one game, but because of what she'd always been, able to see on the field long before others saw it too. In the seasons that followed, Megan Rapinoe would start more, lead more. She would laugh louder, speak bolder, run deeper. But it was here, in the echoes of the 2011 World Cup, where the world first glimpsed what she could truly be. Not a cameo, not a moment, but a narrative all her own, written in touches, delivered in silence, and sealed with a left foot born for symmetry and surprise. The medals caught sunlight, but her focus was elsewhere. London, 2012, a tournament draped in pressure, both legacy and expectation. The US women's national team stepped on to the Olympic stage, not just as competitors but as defenders, of a kind of dominance that had been carefully stitched across decades. Megan Rapinoe, no longer a shadow from the sidelines, stood now as one of the keys to that continuity. Her place wasn't just earned, it was needed. In the opening matches, her presence flickered with purpose. Goals came, assists flowed, but more than that, Rapinoe added shape. Between midfield stretches and sideline dashes, she saw the path no one else noticed. Her left foot struck through angles that collapsed defenses, and with each game, her confidence stopped asking for permission. It began writing the tempo. The semi-final against Canada, now etched as one of the most electric matches in the sport's history, was part madness, part magic. In that game, Rapinoe curled a corner kick directly into the net. No one touched it, no ricochet, just flight, then result. It was not accident, it was alchemy. She scored again, minutes later. A shot from distance that skidded purposefully through defenders and dipped into memory. The match was won in dramatic fashion. Penalty, final whistle, relief, maybe more than triumph. In the gold medal match, facing Japan once again, the chance for resolution arrived. Megan didn't score in that final, but her fingerprints were everywhere. The movement off the ball, the creation of space before anyone knew space was needed, the thread between lines. She danced and dictated, driven not by vengeance, but by rhythm, and when the US women lifted gold, it shimmered with story. Redemption sculpted into metal. But for Megan, victory didn't signal arrival. It simply opened the next gate. She returned. Home changed, but not in the loud ways, not with ego enhanced or volume turned up. She came home with an exhale, and with a question: what does it mean to be seen? And is being seen the same as being known? That summer, she answered for herself and for the world. She came out publicly as gay softly, matter-of-factly, without spectacle, not because it was a campaign, not even because there was pressure, but because hiding no longer matched the shape of her voice. She spoke her truth the way she'd always played, frank, clever, at a slightly unexpected angle that turned the whole field. The announcement rippled around stadiums, around headlines, but for Megan, it was less about announcement and more about alignment. She'd always known. Those close to her had known. But to stand openly within the gaze of the world as precisely who she was that mattered. The conversations shifted. She wasn't just a champion. She wasn't just a playmaker. She was now a symbol, not of perfection, but of presence, of occupying all parts of oneself and not reducing any to appease the watchers. In this new visibility, she didn't retreat, she leaned in. Later that year, while attending the London Olympics and its inevitable swirl of mutual admiration, Among sports figures, Megan met Sue Bird, WNBA star, fierce, focused, known for command and poise. Megan, quick with a line and unpredictable in her pacing off court as on, their styles mismatched, but their gravity-aligned friendship grew. Then, something gentler, then meaning. They became the still point in each other's orbits. Over time, their bond wove tighter, not broadcasted constantly, but lived in flights between games, in notes on hotel nightstands, in letting lights into places too long dimmed. The world would come to know them as a power couple, a phrase that trivialized what was, in fact, a quiet demonstration of love lived openly, authentically, unapologetic ally. Together, they didn't shout. They simply stood, and that, in its own way, echoed louder than anything else could. Back on the field, between World Cups and qualifying rounds, Megan's game continued to mature, not in steps or spikes, but in layers. She began to see wider than just the goal. Assists flowed with increasing elegance, not because she couldn't score, but because she knew how to choose the better moment. She passed up highlight reels in favor of creating them. For others, it wasn't humility. It was understanding that the best art isn't always signed. Fans adored her not just for flair, but for feel. Children pulled purple streaks through their hair. Parents, once hesitant, now nodded through tears as their kids pointed to number 15 with a deeper kind of pride. It wasn't only about athleticism anymore, it was about representation. She wasn't a perfect emblem, she never tried to be, but she was a real one, and that, too many, was more important. As 2015 approached the next World Cup, that balance shimmered. She was wiser now, still cheeky, still audacious, but her play had refined, like a blade used not to slash but to shape. The US team, poised with generational talent, entered the tournament carrying weight. Everyone expected wins, fewer expected wonder, but as always, offered something in between, chaos wrapped in control. In the group stage match against Australia, she reminded the world, a long-range strike that skipped into net, a mazy run that twisted defenders into knots. She didn't dominate every game, but she swayed them, tilted them in small degrees, until victory found its balance. And when the team lifted the trophy victorious at last, 16 years after their last title, she stood among them as anchor and flourish. There were no viral moments, no single clip to point and say, "Look, here." But that was the better truth. Her handprints were everywhere, subtle, steady, felt, even when unseen. By then, the Megan of fame and the Megan of the field had merged. The hair, the smirk, the sparkle were real, but none were costume. She was simply, fully, thoroughly herself. And perhaps that was her most enduring quality. Not the goals, not the golds, but the way she never seemed to apologize for who she was, even when it cost her, especially when it did not. They told her not to kneel, told her it wasn't the place, that the anthem was sacred, that silence was a better kind of strength. But Megan Rapinoe had heard that tone before, disguised as advice, dressed up as tradition. Underneath it all, the same message lingered. Be less. It was 2016, and Colin Kaepernick had just made his protest. He knelt not in spectacle, but in sorrow, in resistance, in conviction, and Megan, watching from afar, felt the alignment in her chest. She understood, not just as a gay woman, not just as an athlete, but as someone shaped by systems that quietly asked her to shrink, while smiling as they did. So one day, Before a game with her club team, she knelt to dot inside her own silence. There was solidarity, and in that silence, echoes stirred. The reaction was swift. Franchises pushed back. The league enacted an anthem policy players were told to stand. Some fans recoiled, others praised her. But through the noise, Rapinoe kept her posture. She didn't lash out. She didn't scream. She knelt when she could, stood when required, but always, spoke with clarity afterward, not with rage, with reason, with example, and with growing recognition that her platform came at a cost. She'd always known visibility came with watchers. She hadn't always known how many would wish to dim the light once it grew. Regardless, she stayed, because something had shifted. The game, she realized, existed beyond touchlines, beyond brackets. It wove through pay, scales and locker rooms, through promotional posters and boardrooms, and it was not impartial. Megan had won medals, scored goals, danced in celebration while children mimicked her stance. But alongside those victories came questions she could no longer unconsciously skip over. Why were the stadiums uneven? Why were the paychecks different? Why were the marketing dollars slower to come? Why, when women won more, did they earn less? Some asked those questions quietly. Megan asked them with a microphone in hand. By 2019, she had become more than a winger on the pitch. She had become a torchbearer for equal pay with her teammates. She filed a lawsuit against the US Soccer Federation, not out of bitterness, not even for personal gain, but to chisel away at a long, frozen wall between recognition and actuality. She knew the price to be outspoken in a game that prefers apology, to be opinionated in a room, expecting obedience, to be gay, to be female, to be competitive, to be brilliant. Too much, they said. Too visible, others whispered. But she never resigned herself to soothe disquiet. She simply continued, like before, with refinement and force. And with every press conference, every panel, every speech before Congress, she reminded the world that athletes were more than jerseys. They were workers, they were women, they were thinkers, and they were allowed to want more. She never asked to be the hero. She reminded people of that, often. Leadership to her was never a pedestal, it was proximity. It was standing close to the fire and holding the gaze of those who lit it. And still, she played, still. She delivered on the field. She slipped passes no one anticipated. She laughed after goals with her whole face. She coached with her expressions, her posture, and off the field, she stood for causes, not tethered to her identity alone. She marched for Black lives. She challenged anti-trans rhetoric. She wrote and advocated for voting access, for reproductive rights, for empathetic governance, not to dominate the conversation, but to widen it. She used her interviews not to collect praise, but to redirect it, to note the subtle patterns of injustice, hiding behind casual decisions. And when asked again and again why, her voice was so loud, she smiled softly, because otherwise, she said, it would be too quiet. Some resisted her activism, some loved her solely for her game, and wanted her to stay there. But Megan had already lived through what happens when truth is boxed for comfort. She wouldn't return to the silence, even when it came with jeers, with edited headlines, with orchestrated backlash. Even then, especially then, she remained, not unmoved, but unmoved when honors came from time. From FIFA, from the White House, her grin was familiar, but her words always sharper. She made speeches that skipped platitudes, She called out injustice, not in anger, but with detailed knowledge of the system, creating it. She didn't do it as a brand. She did it because she'd been inside that machinery, and it was broken. In a world where women are applauded for what they endure, she asked why they must endure at all in a nation that celebrates progress while stalling it. She spoke of action with each year. Her influence expanded books, campaigns, initiatives, but her roots remained. She wasn't full of answers. She was full of questions, and she asked them again and again, until the asking itself became a kind of activism, a pressure, a quake, and still she knelt, if not physically, then spiritually, in protest, in memory, in reverence for those who had done so before, and in service of those who would follow one day. Watching her silhouette, hand on heart or knee to ground and understand. You are allowed to be loud, even gently. You are allowed to be whole. You are allowed to demand more, simply because you exist. And most of all, you are allowed to do it all, with a smirk. Victory, for Megan Rapinoe, never sounded like a roar. It hummed. It sang low in the chest, curled around the lungs like breath warmed by memory. In the quiet between chants and cups lifted high, lingered a note of knowing that what she carried to the 2019 Women's World Cup was more than skill, more than spark. It was presence, high voltage in stillness. Before the tournament even began, the headlines had already turned their eyes to her. Not only the American press, but the world's. Critics questioned her boldness. Pundits dissected her comments, her hair, her posture during the anthem, and she stood there, unbelieving and king, immovable, not defiant for spectacle, but quiet in her resistance, calm, unshaken, deeply sure. The US women's national team entered the tournament as favorites, but with targets on their backs. Every game felt like a statement, every celebration a reaction, and Megan, she didn't play the tournament, she composed it. 6 goals from her left foot and her mind, each one notched with intention. There was no scramble, no accident, just strikes layered with years. Against Spain, she tucked home penalties with surgical poise. Against France, the host nation, a curling free kick that split a nation's breath in half. And then, in the final, against the Netherlands, 46 minutes of prodding, pressure, poise. And then, the call. Penalty. Megan stepped forward, still as sculpture. The net rippled. She did not point to the sky. She did not kneel. She opened her arms wide. A gesture now etched into culture, not joyous, not arrogant, but emblematic of the truth. She'd lived again and again. She had done it her way. Time slowed around that stance. A moment felt by thousands in the seats and millions in the spaces. Between home and hope, she didn't just lift the trophy. She lifted a mirror to a nation, to a game, to a generation. In New York, days later, the streets filled. A sea of red, white, and never hushed blue. The first women's team to earn a ticker-tape parade twice, as the celebratory confetti fell like snow against a defiant summer. Megan stood before a microphone, sunglasses hiding nothing. She did not thank quietly. She called for equality, not just for players, not just for women, but for something simpler. Humanity knit with more dignity. She told the world to do better, to be better, to love more, not in fluff, in challenge. The city heard it, the country half heard. The rest of the world watched. A sports icon giving a speech built not of cliches, but clarity. She could have smiled for cameras and receded, but she didn't. She led with intention, not trying to be a savior, just a signal. She went home and didn't slow interviews, speaking engagements, awards, FIFA, World Player of the Year, Sports Illustrated's Sportsperson of the Year, Time 100, but the core never shifted. She laughed loud. She corrected lazy questions. She made fun of herself, while never softening her message. She wore suits that blended bravado and beauty. She stood with gilded posture, but her eyes always scanned sideways for the ones not yet seen. Children stared up at her during matches, now not to watch a ball move, but to see what possibility looked like, not later. Now little girls with multicolored hair, little boys with Megan's name across their backs, teens clutching pride, flags and soccer scarves in the same hand. She wasn't a metaphor, she was a presence. Her protest had become part of her. Her play had become stitched to protest, and rather than resist that fusion, she made it fluid. She never walked alone, but her voice often walked ahead in locker rooms, in press rooms, at White House standoffs and campaign stages. Still, her teammates cheered loudest, not just for her goals, but her goal, her ability to hold a conversation beyond the box score, her trust in them to walk beside her, and even as critics tried to frame her as centered in self, those who watched closely saw it. She passed first, checked in second. Rarely did she take all the stage. Always, she shared it. Even her now famous celebration, photo arms wide. Expression narrowed to a calm smirk belongs as much to the people who printed it on shirts as it does to her. It wasn't arrogance, not then. It was arrival, of voice, of story, of identity wrapped in jersey. And there, in the afterglow of triumph, in the echo of speeches and the spray of champagne, she did something rare. She gave joy some room for a woman who's always been tasked with leading. Joy is the last thing scribbled down on the game plan. But in those months after, she danced more, sat in sunlight longer, took goofy photos, appeared courtside, cool and lyrical, let herself be iconic, because for once, the world allowed it, and more importantly so did she. And all the while somewhere, on some small field, a young player, maybe with a twist of color in their hair, bent their shot with their left foot, not because they were told to, but because something inside whispered, she did that, so maybe so can I. Because in 2019, Megan Rapinoe didn't just win a tournament, she reshaped what it could mean to win at all, with a gaze like THUNDERCLOUDS, and arms wide not in conquest, but in invitation. Her footsteps slowed, not because the game had outpaced her, but because the rhythm of her life had shifted. The body, once tireless, once impervious, began to whisper truths too quiet to ignore. There were mornings when her knees ached before her eyes had fully opened, moments in games when her mind still moved at full speed, but her legs lagged half a stride behind. Time had arrived not with finality, but with invitation, toward reflection, toward release. She played on because she still could, because within her still burned the instinct, the calculation, the joy. But the horizon, long chased, now appeared not as a finish line, but as an opening gate. In late 2023, Megan Rapinoe announced her retirement. The words were soft, unceremonious, the kind of farewell that didn't beg for eulogies. Instead, they were wrapped in deep knowing that she had given what she had entirely, that her name had wound itself through decades, not just of plays, but of purpose, She took the field for her final match with a heart both steady and unguarded. The stands swelled, not just with fans, but with witnesses. People who had watched her grow, bend, rise, resist. The game began. 7 minutes in, she planted her foot wrong. The pain was sharp, immediate torn Achilles. An injury no athlete wishes for. But oddly, it mirrored her beginning, interrupting the arc, forcing pause, again. And yet, unlike before, this time, she did not rage against it. There was no unfinished business hovering. No silent plea to stay longer. She smiled as she limped off. It was not how she imagined it would end. But endings, like beginnings, rarely obeyed the script. Megan left the pitch, carried by applause, not fate, and in the quiet after that strange hollow that comes when a lifetime pursuit becomes. Past tense, she did not vanish, she wrote. She spoke, she guided, she laughed the same laugh, irreverent and loath, had danced through press rooms and sidelines for years. And yet, even as Megan stepped away from professional play, the fingerprints of her story remained pressed into the fabric of the game. Young girls crossed midfield wearing number 15. Boys wore lavender hairbands and curled their corner kicks just so. Players knelt, players spoke. Players demanded, because she had done it first, stared to lace resistance into her laces in locker rooms. Her quotes lined WHITEBOARDS. Her celebration arms wide, chin lifted, hung on bedroom walls. Not as boast, but as reminder, Megan Rapinoe had always been a mirror and a lighthouse showing us who we were, and what might still be reached. She made soft things fierce, and fierce things joyful. She stood firm when silence was the easy route. She asked restless questions, even when the answers didn't flatter, and she kept playing, always. Always playing, because beneath the iconography, she was still the same kid from readying California boots, scuffed, grin tilted, ball at her feet. She had loved the game before. It loved her back, and when it embraced her fully, she gave more. Not in sprints or highlight reels, but in presence, in proof that queer could be central, that truth need not apologize, that joy, radical and loud, was a kind of warfare too. And now the cleats hang quiet, not spotless, not pristine, but worn, weathered, honored. In their silence lives every touch, one touch. Passes in twilight, crosses curled through wind and crowd, warm-up fields lit by nothing but will dot at night. On lesser watched pitches, echoes still rise. A voice that once laughed under pine-covered skies. A left foot that sent nations breathless. A smirk that said yes. I see you, and you're allowed. She didn't fade from the game. She faded with it like the final note of a song that lingers once the melody is gone. And out there, somewhere, girl stands at a worn-out field edge, ball tucked to her side. She gazes across open space, unsure, hopeful, and in her breath, a whisper that sounds very much like Megan Rapinoe. She was the voice from a quiet town, and the world listened.